Hello, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo Christian values, and real world first hand experience. Today we'll try a little bit different format. I'll put the bio in at the end for those that want to listen, and I'll just say check out goodshepherdtraining.com. And with that, we'll get into today's episode, the definitive guide to lever action rifles. So let's talk lever guns. So why? Why lever guns? Well, I would submit they've proven themselves to be reliable. They have a reasonable rate of fire. You could argue this thing versus that thing, but arguably as fast as anything that's not semi-automatic. And let's just be honest with ourselves, there's just something uniquely American about a lever action rifle. It conjures up images of, John Wayne in the American West. Nostalgia. And yet it's never going to keep up with a semi-automatic. It's never going to do, Mozambique drills to the chest, one to the head at 3 yards like an AR is going to do. But for a lot of practical things where you have to count in the time it takes to reacquire the target, especially if the target is a moving thing, in real-world scenarios, its rate of fire is practically fast enough for most situations. Something like walking through a wadi or a creek bank with sporting clay set up at different distances and just plinking and having fun, simulating hunting or actual hunting scenarios, the rate of fire of a lever gun is plenty. The time it takes you to cycle the lever and get back on the sights, generally having to find a new target anyway, or if it's a living thing you've shot and that target has moved. There's a reason why many hunters have for decades and decades and still do hunt with lever action rifles. Most of the time on a living creature, talking about spot and stalk distances or ambush distances, or still hunting. If you fire a shot, it either does its job or it's not, and that animal's not going to be in the same spot to do an immediate follow-up shot. You have to reacquire your target or move. So for a lot of practical scenarios, the rate of fire for the lever gun versus other things is kind of academic. So it's a reliable, quintessentially iconic American fire control system with a lot of practical application. So I think that pretty much sums up why the lever gun. Now there's a lot of different kinds of lever guns. Let's talk about a few of the different kinds. Rimfire. Now, like a lot of other things, when I recommend training with a platform, I often recommend the 22, and I'm going to do the same here. Training with a 22 to get familiar, like you would do with a rifle, like you would do with a handgun. Likewise, you can do with the lever gun. And that's not even the only reason. Maybe you just want to hunt small game. And like we talked about, in a lot of hunting scenarios, the lever gun is going to be just fine. And a really, really cool advantage of the lever action 22s, as opposed to the semi-automatic counterparts, is since you are cycling the action manually, which you might think is a disadvantage for speed, but it gives you a lot more flexibility since the action working is not dependent on the power of the ammo. A lot of the times you can fire shorts, longs, and long rifles. Now this has a couple of distinct advantages. Has advantages for when ammo's tough to get, which we've all lived through that recently, if you're listening. So maybe you're at, big box store brand X, and they don't have 22 long rifle, but they have 22 long. Well, most people that shoot semi-autos, which is most people nowadays, they can't shoot that, but you can. And the big advantage, if you want to be quiet, if you want to be sneaky, clandestine, 22 shorts and CB caps out of a long barrel gun, like a lever action 22, are super quiet. And there's a lot of applications for that. So you get a reasonable rate of fire with a super quiet firearm in which you do not need a tax stamp or a special permission from the government. And that in and of itself is a really cool thing that the lever action offers. So you get a reasonably quick rate of fire with a very, very quiet and still capable firearm without the need of a suppressor. Let's talk about perhaps the most advantageous part of the lever action rimfire. They're just fun. They're just fun to shoot and fun to go out with. And let's not forget that shooting can, and not always, but it's good to remember that shooting can be fun. It's not all about how fast your Mozambique drill is, or how good a score you got on the FBI qual, how tight a group you can shoot at 100 yards. Sometimes it's just fun to go out and shoot stuff. Safely and legally. Going out and shooting cans, picking them up when you're done, taking a kid out and shooting cans of shaving cream. Just going out and having fun. And a lever action rimfire, they're just fun. And we'll give a real quick shout out to Rossi. Just came out with a gallery gun. Shame that we can't get American companies like Winchester and Remington to come back out with those, but just a pump action 22. I know this episode's on lever actions, but that's just really cool. And if you like that idea for just going out and shooting and having fun, a pump action 22, likewise, very cool. Now, we just did an episode on pistol caliber carbines, and I was talking about the modern pistol caliber carbines, like the MP5 and such, AR-15s and 9mm. But pistol caliber carbines have been a thing for a long time, and been a thing for a long time in America because of America's love for, or necessity for, we talked about a reasonable rate of fire and an intermediate effective cartridge at defensive ranges. We've had that in the lever action for quite a while, and it continues today. There are a lot of really good, let's call them PCCs, lever action pistol caliber carbines. 38 Special, 357. 44 Special, 44 Magnum. 45 Long Colt. These are fantastic, fantastic. And if you lived somewhere or didn't want an AR, or didn't want a semi-auto, but you wanted, again, that reasonable rate of fire with an effective cartridge without a lot of recoil, allowing for fast follow-up shots, and you lived somewhere where you couldn't have detachable magazine semi-auto for whatever reason, we could argue whether that's right or wrong. I think everybody ought to be able to own whatever firearm. But I digress. If you can't or don't want to, perhaps your next best option would be a lever action in 38 Special 357. And then obviously if you wanted to kind of do it all, step it up, you were mostly going to hunt with it, but you also wanted it for defensive use, you could make an argument that the 44 Special 44 Magnum is a better choice than the 38 357. But both of those are fantastic choices. If you want a little bit more of we talked about quintessential American, the 45 Long Colt has been around a long time, although it wasn't originally chambered in lever actions. It was a pistol cartridge, or a revolver cartridge, actually. But it's still very American, and a lever action in 45 Long Colt is pretty cool. And it's worth mentioning the 327 Federal, which lets you shoot a bunch of other cartridges, the 32 H&R, I believe the 32 Smith & Wesson, and there might be one other one, or maybe even more. But that's a good little fun intermediate cartridge that will be fine for defense with the right loads, and will be fine for medium-sized game with the right loads. And if you went down to like the 32 Smith & Wesson, I assume super accurate and super fun to shoot, and probably pretty inexpensive to reload for. Not a lot of powder. You could cast your own lead bullets. So that's worth a look. Now, all guns are compromises. If it's great at one thing, it won't be great at another. But a good all-around gun for defensive ranges, for common ambush hunting ranges, for pretty much any hunting, in most cases, east of the Mississippi besides like bean fields. A lever action in 44 mag or 357 mag would also be a good choice for close in-range hunting and defensive use. It would be a good, well-rounded gun, and you would give up some stuff, give up your long range, give up semi-auto capability, but it wouldn't be a bad choice. If you like the idea of that and you're into watching and being ready, there's a whole other episode on lever actions for survival. You can check that out. Now, lever actions are not limited to the pistol calibers or even the lever action calibers. There are plenty of legit full power rifle cartridges chambered in lever actions, the Browning BLR, and the Henry Long Ranger. These are modern iterations, but they are not a modern thing. The Winchester Model 1895, and I'm not the biggest lever action history guy, but I'm familiar with the Winchester lever action 1895. Ironically, not used by Americans in World War I, a lever action, but used by the Russians in 7.62 by 54R. And from what I understand, it did quite well. This is not a new thing. And from what I've heard, Theodore Roosevelt quite liked his 1895 and 405 Winchester. And it's worth a mention that right now, I believe, last time I checked, Winchester is making still the model 1895, and you can get it in 30-06. And that's pretty cool. But if you told me, okay, I can no more use my go-to, Kimber bolt-action rifles for hunting, for guiding. I can't use a semi-auto. I have to use a lever action to hunt whatever in North America. It would probably be a Browning BLR. They make a light one. I would probably get it in 243, although if I had done everything with it, I might get it in the 308. And that would be a fantastic choice. And I don't think you'd be giving up much, especially not with the kind of hunting that I do. I don't like to sit in a stand. I don't like to shoot at animals past 300 yards. I like to spot and stalk and get in close. And I have really toyed with the idea of getting a Browning BLR in 243. That's one of my favorite go-to hunting calibers. I've killed, I think probably, I don't have hard numbers on this, but I've probably killed more deer and elk with a 243 than anything else. Now the Henry Long Ranger, I've never owned a Henry. They seem to have a good reputation, but the Henry Long Ranger is also a thing, and I think they make it in most of the popular calibers. They even make it in 6.5 Creedmoor, if I'm not mistaken. You can get a legit full-powered rifle cartridge in a lever action. And again, that's not a new thing. One of the ones that we should mention before we move on is the Savage Model 99. And this is one of the guns I saw in a shop years ago, and I kind of wish that I had bought it. A Savage 99 and 308. And they don't covet a lot of money like the older Winchesters and stuff do, or the older Marlins do. And I think it's because they look different. I think they were really ahead of their time, and they are just a fantastic rifle. If you're looking for like a 1950 style hunt with some nostalgia, 50s, 60s, a Savage Model 99 and 308 or a similar caliber would be really cool. One of those and a red plaid shirt, LL Bean boots. That'd be a pretty cool hunt. So don't think that you can't have a full powered rifle cartridge if you want a lever action. But let's talk about what I think of, or what I think many Americans think of when they think of lever action. And I'll call this like the quintessential lever action calibers. Number one, obviously, is the 30-30. And the 30-30 is fantastic. Did a whole episode on the 30-30. If you want to know more about the cartridge specifically, I'd listen to that. But I would argue it was America's first legit intermediate cartridge. And it is fantastic at killing medium and large game inside of 200 yards, which the majority of the time, for most people, is more than enough. It does fantastic. Plenty of people hunt elk with a 300 Win Mag. But if I had to guess, if I was a wagering man, I'd wager that far more elk have been put in the freezer or strung up in a tree by the 30-30 than a 300 Win Mag. It does the job. It does it in a light, handy, quick follow-up shot capable carbine. And there are many of these. But the Winchester 1894 and the Marlin 336. Now I could do a whole episode on the merits of one versus the other, the advantages of one versus the other. But for me, the Winchester 94 is an 1894. That's how long it's been around. Is a little bit faster handling, a little bit lighter, a little bit faster shooting. The Marlin is a little bit easier to mount optics on, a little bit beefier, more robust design. But they're both great. And in a 30-30, If you're looking to get into big game hunting, don't think that you need, a 6.5 Creedmoor with a 20 power scope and all this fancy stuff. Literally a flannel shirt and a 30-30 Winchester Marlin, Winchester, and time spent in the woods and a willingness to push through some adversity and learn, and you'll get meat on the table with that thing. But the quintessential lever action calibers, to me, number one, the 30-30, number two, the 32 Winchester centerfire, also done an episode on that, and my personal favorite lever action caliber, and probably personal favorite of the calibers we're going to talk about today, is a 35 Remington. I did an entire podcast on the 35 Remington. If this cartridge interests you, I would hope that you'd go back and listen to that one. I grew up and I hunted bear with a 35 Remington and a Marlin. It is a fantastic, fantastic caliber. And there are a few small circles and pockets in the U.S. where it's known. But largely outside of that, it's unknown. But it is a sledgehammer on deer and black bear inside of 200 yards. It is kind of the John Henry working-man sledgehammer of medium to large game, a quintessential woods caliber, a dark timber caliber. And in the world of high BCs and sectional density numbers and a bunch of other stuff, it's kind of being forgotten, and I think that's a shame. But if I had to pick my favorite caliber we're going to talk about today, it would be the 35 Remington. And again, there's a whole other episode if you want to look that up. But I would consider those the quintessential lever action calibers. Now let's move on to the big bore lever actions. And this is actually what inspired the episode. A very dear patron, and I hope I can call him a friend, that came on the episode to talk about scout rifles. He was talking about this, big bore lever actions, and that kind of inspired the episode. But I thought more comprehensive would be a definitive guide to lever actions. Well, let's talk about the big bores. Do you guys remember the show Home Improvement? It was always more power, more power. Well, here's where we get into the more power part of the episode for lever actions. Now, lever actions can be quite a strong action and handle quite a bit. We talk about, American and America and powerful and manly. A good manifestation of that is a nice lever gun in 4570. Quintessential buffalo killing cartridge from days of yore. A Marlin model 1895 and 4570. Just a big, beefy American killing machine. And I think I know that the 4570 was not initially chambered in a lever action. It has become kind of American and iconic and just a powerful lever action round, the 4570. That's kind of the one you think about, or at least I think most people think about when they think of big bore lever actions. You can load the 4570 from the original loading all the way up to some super hot buffalo bore, just shoulder thumping loads from mild to wild. It is a very flexible, perhaps the most flexible of the big bore rounds. You can, like I said, make it a shoulder thumper, make your eyes water when you shoot it, but you don't have to. You can load it down and even load it down. I mean, it killed many a buffalo in its original guise, which is not a super hot load. I don't know why you think you'd need more than that, but some people just want more, and that's fine. If you wanted the most flexible big bore lever action, and probably the most American, it'd probably be the 4570. They also make, we're talking about big bores, what's called the 450 Marlin. Think of it as like a super hot 4570, belted case. And the next one I think most people think about when they think about it, the big bore lever action, is a 444 Marlin. Think about this as a 44 Magnum. It's really cool. It's really powerful. For me, I don't know anything that I would hunt that I couldn't hunt with a 44 Magnum. But if you want it, and you want a super powerful round for smashing hogs, for smashing moose, for putting a round into an engine block, for who knows what, the 444 Marlin it's a beast of a round. Now, with just saying that, I figured I had to back it up with some numbers, so I went and grabbed the trusty Hornady reloading manual that you've heard me quote in several episodes. Now, we just talked about the 30-30, kind of the classic lever action cartridge. And I don't want to get too nerdy with this, but I'm going to throw out a few numbers. just to give you an idea, the 30-30, which has killed countless number of deer and elk, is generally throwing a 150 grain bullet at around 2,300 feet per second, and that's a hot load in my manual. 150 at 23. Another classic loading of this would be the 170 grain, and that's 170 grain at 22, and that's the hottest load listed in my manual. 35 Remington, like we talked about, one of my personal favorites, and kind of your classic for that is a 200 grain load. A 200 grain load at 2,100 feet a second. Now let's talk about the big bore 4570. Now this is a trapdoor loading, one of the original loadings, like we said, a pretty mild loading. That's 300 grain bullet at 1,900 feet a second. We're talking a 300 grain bullet. Now my manual lists a different load for the 1895 Marlin, which is, like we're talking about, one of the quintessential lever actions. And it lists a 300 grain bullet at 2,100 feet a second. A 300 grain bullet at 2,100 feet a second. If we compare that to, that's a similar velocity to what we talked about with the 35 Remington with a 200 grain bullet, or the Winchester with a 170 grain bullet with a 300 grain bullet. And it still pushes a 350 grain bullet at 1,900 feet a second. Now the 444 Marlin, similar bullets to the 44 Magnum, kind of one of your quintessential loads is a 240 grain, and it's pushing that out at 2,400 feet a second. 2,400. That's faster than the 30-30 with a 150 grain bullet, and you're pushing a 240 grain bullet. It's still pushing a 265 grain bullet at 2,300 feet a second. Now, a lot of different Russian loads for the 7.62x39, a lot of different loads, but let's just say a classic loading, and these numbers made me think of that, is a 123 grain bullet at 2,100 and some odd feet per second. 123 grain at a 2,100 and some feet per second. The 444 Marlin, let's go back, is launching a 265 grain bullet at 2,200 feet per second. That's more than double. That's more than double the mass with more velocity. And the 7.62x39 is no slouch. That's known as being kind of the quintessential worldwide intermediate war-fighting cartridge. To give you some idea of the power that we're talking about in these big bore lever guns. And one of my personal favorites. Don't really have a desire for a big bore lever gun. I know it's a lot of people's thing. It's not really my thing. I like to shoot, and I like to shoot a lot, and I don't like to get beat up when I shoot. But if I was going to hunt with a big bore lever action rifle, it would be this one. It would be the 405 Winchester. If I'm going to hunt with a big bore, why not get one of the guns Theodore Roosevelt liked to hunt with that hunted the West? Yeah, the 4570 is cool, but I think a lot of people have them, a lot of people use them. I think it'd be super cool to do a buffalo hunt or something similar with a 405 Winchester, or go to Africa with a Winchester 1895 and 405 Winchester. For me, if I was going to pick one. And even though it has been around all that time, you're still talking about a cartridge that's pushing a 300 grain bullet at 2250. Big enough to kill anything on the planet. If I was going to hunt with a 4570 and I was going to hunt buffalo or something, that would be cool too, but I would like to do that with, a trapdoor, a single shot, because that's what they use. That'd be kind of cool. If I was going to pick a big bore lever gun, I would probably pick the 405 Winchester. But just a really cool list of some really cool guns and some big bore lever guns. So, whatever is more your style in the lever gun. Whether it's a little bitty 22 short to take care of some pigeons, or it's a 444 Marlin to hunt moose from a canoe in Maine. Quintessentially iconic, American, practical, just good all-around rifles. I'll tell you, not really my thing. I've owned a couple of lever actions in the past. I don't own any now. I had a 44 Magnum that was great, and I had a 45 Long Colt that was great that was given to me by a dear friend that I sold for a rifle that I would use more. But I kind of wish, looking back at it now, that I had kept it. But anyway, I digress. I'm a simple man. If you like this podcast, you may also like Simple Man sermons. But I like simple things, especially when it comes to shooting. And although people think lever actions are simple, if you've ever taken one apart and disassembled it to Cerakote it or clean it and looked inside it, you'll know that they're not simple. Something like a bolt action rifle. A common one, like a Winchester pre-64 action, which is based on a Mauser action, which goes back just as far to the 1800s, or one of your common push-feed Remington 700 actions or something like that, is far simpler. And just for me, if I'm going to pick a manual operated gun, I'll pick one of those. The lever actions are great, and I have toyed around with the idea of getting a lever action 22 for the reasons of quiet, repeatable firepower. That can have a lot of advantages, and you can just use your imagination and think of what those are. You know, hunting pigeons in a grain silo where you don't want to bother all the neighbors, to taking care of varmints and vermin. Which leads me to the tactical tip of the day. We talked about the 22 short. But if you reload, you can make a really quiet lever gun. You can get a really quiet gun without needing a tack stamp and a suppressor and all the stuff that goes along with the Class 3 stuff. I'm not talking about doing anything illegal. I'm not even talking about going outside the parameters of reloading manuals. If you look up some reloading data, you get something, let's say, a lever action that'll fire 357 Magnum 38 Special or 44 Magnum 44 Special. You look at the heaviest bullet for caliber you can find, a super heavy bullet with the lightest load, like a 300 grain or 300 and something grain, 325 grain 44 bullet, loaded to the lightest 44 Special powder charge. And I'm talking published loads here. Out of a long barrel of a lever gun, without the action slamming back and forth like a semi-auto, you would be amazed at how quiet you can get a round like that. And a round like that, a big heavy 325 grain 44 load, even at very slow velocities, still does a lot of damage. And again, nothing illegal, nothing underhand, nothing unsafe if you follow the reloading data. No more dangerous, probably less dangerous than loading up a super hot max charge load. Within the parameters, you can have a very powerful, very quiet firearm, completely legally, completely safely. If you're into reloading and doing things like that, lever action and like I said, a 38 Special or a 44 Special, you can check that out, look up the data on that. It's a pretty cool tactical tip for the day. Well, I hope you've liked listening to Gunfighter Life. If you like this podcast, you may also like the Alpha Male podcast. Guns are cool, but there's more to life than just guns. If you like this, like I said, you may like the really important stuff in life, most important, which is God. Check out Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man, called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. If you can't remember those, you can find all that and more at goodshepherdtraining.com. Throw in a tactical tip of the day. I'll also throw in a tactical verse of the day. This is what David tells Goliath. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all the assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with a sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. With that, I'm going to say thanks for listening and have a blessed day. As I said in the beginning, I'll plug in the bio. And I appreciate everybody that listens and everybody that supports. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, he got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country.
not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic.